The sirens echoed across the East River just before dawn. Flashing red and blue lights bounced off the steel fencing as correctional officers sprinted across the yard. An inmate had gone down near the recreation cage, bleeding, unconscious, surrounded by shouting men in gray uniforms. Above them, guard towers cut dark shapes into the pale morning sky. Beyond the razor wire, the skyline of Manhattan glowed peacefully, as if it had no idea what was unfolding less than a mile away. Rikers Island, a city within a city, Detective Elena Vargas stepped out of the transport van, her heels crunching against loose gravel. She had worked homicides in Brooklyn for 13 years. She thought she had seen everything. But Rikers was different. This wasn't just a crime scene. It was a sealed ecosystem, 10 separate jails, thousands of inmates, hundreds of officers, and more secrets than the NYPD liked to admit. The injured inmate was identified as Marcus Hale, 32, awaiting trial on armed robbery charges. He wasn't supposed to be a high-profile target, yet someone had cornered him in a blind spot, one of the few places cameras didn't fully cover. Who saw it? Elena asked. No one answered. Inside Rikers, silence was currency. As paramedics rushed Hale toward the infirmary, Elena looked up at the looming concrete buildings. Built in the 1930s, expanded through decades of political promises and budget cuts, Rikers had become a holding pen for over 80,000 inmates a year, most of them not yet convicted of anything. Overcrowded dorms, short-staffed units, layers of tension stacked like bricks. She had read the reports. Assaults rising, use of force complaints buried, federal investigations threatening oversight. But paperwork never smelled like this sweat, metal fear. A captain met her near the intake corridor. Internal matter, he said tightly, probably gang-related. Elena didn't miss the way his eyes flicked toward the cameras. Rikers had housed some of the most notorious names in American crime history, members of the Bloods and Crips, mafia affiliates, alleged cartel runners, Wall Street fraudsters waiting for federal transfer. Some entered quietly. Some left in headlines, but many disappeared into the system, their stories reduced to booking numbers. Marcus Hale wasn't famous. So, why did this feel orchestrated? Elena requested surveillance footage from the recreation yard. The technician hesitated before handing over a tablet. The screen showed Marcus stepping into the cage at 5:42 a.m. 3 other inmates followed. At 5:47, the camera glitched. Static lines. 5 full seconds of distortion. When the image returned, Hale was already on the ground. That's convenient, Elena muttered. She zoomed in on the corner of the frame, just before the feed cut. A guard stood near the gate. Not intervening. Not reacting. Just watching. Who is that officer, she asked. The captain shifted his weight. That's Officer Daniel Crow. 8 years on the job. Clean record. Elena froze the frame. Crow wasn't looking at the fight. He was looking directly at the camera, as if he knew exactly when it would go dark. And when they pulled Hale's medical chart an hour later, they discovered something that changed everything. Marcus Hale had filed a formal complaint 3 days earlier. He claimed someone inside Rikers had put a price on his silence. Hale's face was swollen, one eye barely opened. His wrists were cuffed loosely to the rails, not as punishment, but as policy. You filed a complaint, Elena said quietly, about someone putting a price on you. Hale swallowed, wincing. I didn't say it like that. What did you say? He glanced at the correctional officer stationed outside the door. I said things were being moved. Transfers. Dorm switches. People who talked too much ended up in fights. Elena stepped closer. Who's running it? Hale's breathing grew shallow. You think gangs run Rikers? No, they just play their part. Before he could say more, the heart monitor spiked. A nurse rushed in, urging Elena out. As the door closed, Hale's final words echoed in her mind. Check the intake logs. Back in the administrative building, Elena requested access to inmate transfer records from the past 6 months. What she found wasn't chaos, it was pattern. Certain inmates, all facing sensitive charges, fraud, corruption, Witness cooperation had been quietly reassigned within days of filing grievances or requesting protective custody. Each time, they ended up in housing units with known violent offenders. Officially, it was coincidence. Unofficially, it looked like pressure. And one name appeared repeatedly on the authorization line: Officer Daniel Crow. Crow wasn't a high-ranking official. He didn't control housing policy. Yet, somehow, his digital signature appeared on internal movement forms, often minutes before system updates. Elena dug deeper. Rikers wasn't just a jail, it was a machine fueled by contracts, overtime budgets, and political optics. Over the years, investigations had uncovered brutality, neglect, and corruption. Reform had been promised, billions allocated, closure dates announced, then postponed. But if someone inside was manipulating transfers to silence inmates, this wasn't just mismanagement. It was orchestration. Elena tracked down Crow in the staff locker room. He was calm. Too calm. "You were on yard duty during Hale's assault," she said. Crow nodded. "Fights happen." The camera glitched. "Old system." "You authorized his housing change last week." Crow leaned back against a locker. "I process paperwork. That's my job." Elena held up a printout. 3 inmates who filed complaints were moved into high-conflict units within 48 hours. 2 were hospitalized. 1 recanted his statement. Crow's jaw tightened for just a second. "Are you accusing me of something, detective?" Before she could respond, her phone buzzed. A message from the precinct. Another inmate had been found unresponsive in his cell housing unit C95. Name: Terrence Doyle. Elena's stomach dropped. Doyle was on her list. He had filed a complaint 2 weeks earlier about excessive force during a search. When she arrived at C95, the corridor was already sealed. Officers stood rigidly along the walls. Inside the cell, Doyle lay on the floor, medical staff performing CPR. The official explanation came quickly: possible overdose. But Elena noticed something else. Doyle's bunk had been stripped, his personal papers gone, and pinned beneath his mattress, barely visible, was a folded sheet of paper. She slipped it into evidence before anyone could object. Back in her vehicle, she unfolded it. It wasn't a note. It was a list. Inmate names, housing units, dates. At the top, written in block letters: transfer schedule confirmed. And at the bottom, one final name circled in red: Marcus Hale. Elena stared at the pattern connecting the names. These weren't random moves. Someone was building a system within the system, deciding who got silenced and when. But the most chilling part wasn't the list itself. It was the final column. Next to each name was a single word: resolved. The word pending wouldn't leave Detective Elena Vargas's mind. By the time she returned to Rikers the next morning, Marcus Hale had been transferred again, this time to administrative segregation for his own protection. The official record said it was precautionary. The timing said otherwise. Terrence Doyle was pronounced dead at 2:17 a.m. The cause was listed as suspected overdose, pending toxicology. Another quiet entry in a system that processed thousands every year. But Elena had the list. And lists didn't lie. She cross-referenced every name with incident reports, medical visits, and grievance filings. 7 inmates had filed complaints against either correctional officers or internal housing decisions. Within weeks, each had been moved. 5 were hospitalized. 1 recanted. 1 was now dead. And Marcus Hale was still alive. For now. Elena brought the evidence to her supervisor at the precinct. He read it in silence, then leaned back in his chair. "You're stepping into federal territory," he said. "Rikers is already under oversight. If you push this without airtight proof, it'll get buried." "It's already buried," Elena replied. "That's the point." She needed something undeniable. So she went back to the glitch, the 5 seconds of static in the recreation yard footage. She contacted a digital forensics specialist in Queens, someone who had testified in corruption trials before. Together, they enhanced the corrupted segment frame by frame. What they found wasn't random distortion. It was a manual interruption. The signal had been overridden, locally physically accessed through a maintenance panel near the yard. Only staff had that clearance, and access logs showed that panel had been opened that morning. Authorized by Officer Daniel Crow, Elena didn't request a meeting this time. She requested an arrest warrant. Internal Affairs moved fast once the forensic report hit their desks. Crow was detained during roll call, his badge removed in front of a silent line of officers. Some looked stunned. Others looked away. But Crow didn't panic. In the interrogation room, he folded his hands calmly. "You think I built this?" he asked. "You signed the transfers. You accessed the camera system. You were on duty during the assault," Elena said. Crow shook his head slowly. "You're looking at the wrong level. Then help me understand." He leaned forward, lowering his voice. "Rikers processes over 1,000 inmates a week. Housing is power. Transfers are leverage. You move someone at the right time into the right dorm, and problems solve themselves. Who's ordering it?" Crow smiled faintly. "You really think a mid-level officer decides which inmates get pressure?" Elena slid the transfer list across the table. 7 men, all silenced. Crow looked at it and didn't deny it. "Do you know how many lawsuits Rikers faces every year?" he asked. "How many millions the city pays? You stop complaints early, numbers go down. Statistics look better. Funding stays intact. By letting inmates get hurt? By maintaining order." His words weren't angry. They were clinical. Internal Affairs widened the investigation. Subpoenas were issued. Administrative supervisors were questioned. Emails surfaced, subtle language about managing liabilities and strategic housing adjustments. No one wrote the word assault. No one wrote silence. But the implication hung between every line. Marcus Hale was moved off the island within 48 hours, transferred to a federal holding facility pending review of his case. For the first time, he was out of Rikers' reach. Daniel Crow was charged with evidence tampering and misconduct, but the higher chain of command, they cited policy confusion, staffing shortages, outdated systems. Reform hearings resumed at City Hall. Officials promised closure plans, new facilities, oversight committees. But as Elena stood on the Queen's shoreline weeks later, watching the ferry move toward Rikers Island, she couldn't shake the feeling that nothing fundamental had changed. Rikers still stood there, concrete and steel, a city within a city. Crow had been a cog. The machine remained. 3 months after Doyle's death, another inmate filed a complaint about housing manipulation. 2 days later, he was transferred. Officially, it was routine. Unofficially, his status in the internal system was marked with a word Elena now recognized too well: pending. And if you think the story was intense, you're not ready for what's still hidden behind those walls, make sure you subscribe, because some cities keep secrets long after the headlines fade.